What would you do if an entire town, teachers, parents, even friends, believed something was wrong with your child just because he didn't speak? Oak Bluffs is a quiet seaside town where every house has a white picket fence, an American flag perfectly placed on the porch, and PTA meetings look more like high society tea parties. Everything seems perfect until an 11-year-old black boy arrives, quiet, polite, and different. There's nothing wrong with him. He just doesn't speak, just silence. And somehow that alone is enough to make the whole system turn away. But what they didn't know was that his silence was remembering everything. Every look, every whisper, every blow thrown without raising a hand. Then one Friday afternoon, in front of the entire community, he stepped forward and made them all stand. Not because he screamed, but because, for the first time, they saw the truth they had chosen not to see. This is the story of a child who was never invisible. The adults just chose not to look. But this time, no one could turn away. Oak Bluffs was often called the place where even the walls knew how to keep secrets. The upscale seaside neighborhood nestled along the coast of Massachusetts was a perfect puzzle piece of affluent America, where every cobblestone was meticulously scrubbed, every lawn trimmed to golf course precision, and every rooftop looked like it had stepped out of a luxury design magazine tailored for the elite. But among all that glittering charm, there was one house that commanded respect not merely for its property value, but because of the woman behind its gates, Celeste Holt. She was a single black mother and the owner of a real estate development company called Horizon Grove, ranked by Forbes as one of the 50 most powerful CEOs in New England. Celeste wasn't the flashy type. She didn't drive sports cars, didn't wear heavy gold watches, and had no obsession with posting vacation pictures with captions longer than the trip itself. What she guarded most was her privacy, and who she loved most was her only son, Malachi Holt. Malachi was a quiet 9-year-old who loved reading books about the solar system and had the unusual habit of waking up even before the alarm clock. He didn't talk much, but his eyes always brimmed with thoughtfulness, and every morning on his way to school, he greeted the staff in the neighborhood like a little gentleman. Malachi lived with his mother in a villa that blended Indochine elegance with modern New England design. 2 stories, 7 bedrooms, a sea-facing balcony, and a backyard big enough to host a soccer game. But Malachi's favorite part wasn't the playroom or the mini theater. It was the attic, where he'd set up a small telescope. From there, he could see the horizon and imagine his mother as an astronaut, flying out into the cosmos each night and returning in time each morning to make peanut butter toast. And she always did come back, until one day a work trip changed everything. Horizon Grove had just signed a deal for a smart city project on the outskirts of Denver. Celeste had to leave for 3 weeks to oversee the construction and meet with the investment board. She tried to delay, tried to delegate to her vice presidents, but they all looked at her as if saying, "You're the only one they want to see." That morning, as Oak Bluffs still dozed under a blanket of fog, Celeste bent down and hugged Malachi tight. "Baby, I'll be back soon. Miss Rhonda will take care of you. Mr. Terry and Bryce will be around too. You won't be alone, okay?" Malachi nodded. He wasn't a clingy child, but something in his eyes said he wasn't completely at ease. Celeste looked deep into his eyes and placed a hand on his head. "If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you have to tell me or Miss Cora. Promise me, okay?" Malachi nodded again. Celeste stood up, glanced at her watch, and signaled to Rhonda Clay, her longtime house manager, to come over. Rhonda was a woman in her early 40s, with neatly pinned curly brown hair, a fitted pencil skirt, and always wore a thin scarf around her neck like a symbol of refined professionalism. Celeste trusted Rhonda, at least she did, before everything changed. Rhonda stepped forward and placed a hand on Malachi's shoulder. "We'll take care of the little man like he's our own. Right, Terry?" From the driveway, Terry Clay, Rhonda's husband, waved with a grin wide enough to suggest he just won the lottery. "We'll treat this place like our home," he joked, though for some reason, the comment made Celeste hesitate for a second before getting into the car. Her flight departed at 10 a.m., and just as Rhonda had promised, their son, Bryce Clay, moved into the house later that very afternoon. The 10-year-old was bigger than Malachi, with reddish-brown hair and a cocky demeanor. He always had an iPad in hand and never stopped chewing gum. On his first day, Bryce called Malachi "dude" and pointed to the playroom. "Whatever you've got in there is mine now too." Malachi didn't reply. He simply stepped back and let Bryce walk in. From a distance, Rhonda watched, saying nothing, just smirking like a proud mother pleased to see her child confidently fitting in. On the second day, Malachi had no breakfast. Rhonda said she forgot because Bryce had woken up late and needed extra eggs. On the third day, Malachi's astronomy books were scattered on the floor, pages bent. Rhonda told him not to keep exclusive toys and to learn to share. Miss Cora, the elderly housemaid who'd worked for the Holt family since Celeste was a college student, began to feel that something wasn't right. She was a white woman with a voice as soft as cotton and hands that trembled with age, but her eyes remained sharp as ever. One evening, she walked into the kitchen and saw Rhonda trying on Celeste's silk robe in front of a mirror. Rhonda laughed. "She won't need this anymore. I'm just checking if it fits after washing." Miss Cora said nothing. She quietly folded a tablecloth, but her fingers tightened around the fabric, and the oddities didn't stop. Terry began standing closer to Malachi than necessary. He'd drive the boy to school and, through the rearview mirror, sneer, "Any kid lucky enough to go to a private school like this should be grateful. Your mom's sharp, but you're just riding her coattails, aren't you?" Malachi turned his face away and said nothing, but a crack had started forming inside him. As the days passed, the crack grew. Malachi was barred from the kitchen, told he was getting in the way when asking about dinner. Bryce wandered into any room he pleased, played with anything he wanted, even tried on Celeste's shoes like he was preparing for a play. And the worst part, Celeste had no idea. Every evening, she FaceTimed home. Rhonda would adjust the camera angle so Malachi sat neatly on the sofa, dressed tidily, smiling. Terry stood behind the camera, arms crossed. Bryce waved from afar. "We're super close, don't worry, ma'am," he'd say. Celeste smiled, reassured. Only Miss Cora noticed the stiffness in that smile. She wanted to speak up. Several times she reached for her phone to message Celeste, but each time Rhonda would appear right behind her, smiling sweetly but with eyes sharp as needles. "Miss Cora, I just swapped out the hallway lights. Would you mind wiping the dining table for me?" Miss Cora was no longer the head housekeeper. She was just an old shadow lingering in a house that no longer felt like hers. But she knew, and she waited. Waited for Celeste to realize. Waited for Malachi to no longer be able to endure it and speak out. But Malachi was a good kid. He didn't complain. He didn't speak. He just quietly tucked his books into a corner, went to bed earlier, and each night, instead of peering through his telescope, he stared at a photograph of his mother smiling on the beach, her hand tightly holding his. And he whispered, not with his lips, but with his eyes, "Mom, come home. Something is really wrong here." On the fifth day since his mother boarded the plane, Malachi woke up earlier than usual. Winter sunlight slid through the curtains, casting cold streaks of light across the ceiling, not warm enough to chase away the emptiness. He sat up and walked barefoot to the kitchen like he always did. But today there was no smell of toast, no clicking of the coffee machine. Bryce was sitting at the table, eating waffles drenched in syrup, one leg hooked over the chair like it was his own. Rhonda stood nearby, smiling sweetly as she poured more milk into her son's cereal bowl. When she saw Malachi walk in, she paused for a beat, then turned away, pretending not to notice. Malachi stood still, his small hands clutching the hem of his pajama top. "Can I have something to eat?" he asked quietly. Rhonda didn't turn her head. "Oh, sorry, Malachi. I only had enough for one serving today. I'll make it up to you tomorrow, okay?" The words came out like velvet, but to Malachi they sliced like a paper cut. He nodded and turned silently back upstairs, stomach empty and heart tangled like knotted yarn. But that was only the beginning of the erasure. The next day, when Malachi came home from school, he noticed his blue backpack was no longer hanging on its usual hook. Bryce was wearing it, casually as if it had always belonged to him. "Looks cool, right?" Bryce said, spinning to show off the straps. "My dad says this color suits me better." Malachi froze. "That's mine," he whispered. Bryce smirked. "Yours? I don't see your name on it. If it doesn't have a name, anyone can use it." Rhonda walked over from a distance and heard them, but instead of intervening, She crossed her arms and said calmly, "Bryce is just borrowing it for the day. Boys need to learn how to share. Your mom always says that, doesn't she?" Malachi didn't answer. He just lowered his head and walked upstairs, hoping something still remained up there that truly belonged to him. But no. When he opened his closet, he saw his favorite orange hoodie, the birthday gift from his mother, was gone. In its place on the desk was a note. Bryce needed a jacket. Don't be selfish. In Rhonda's handwriting. From that day on, Malachi began to realize that something was fading. Not just the objects, but the line between homeowner and guest on borrowed time. The playroom was now open all day, but everything in it, from the engineering Lego set to the space books, had been claimed by Bryce. He even used markers to scribble his name on the spines of the books. Rhonda laughed and said, "Books are meant to be personalized. That makes them special." Miss Cora, as always, stayed quiet, wiping tables or peeling fruit in the kitchen. She observed, but the wrinkles on her forehead deepened each day. There were things she couldn't fix, at least not while Celeste still believed everything was fine. One day Malachi came home and found his bed disrupted. The blankets were askew, his bookshelf rearranged, and the framed photo of him and his mother on the desk was gone. He rushed downstairs to ask Miss Cora, but she shook her head. "I didn't see it. Are you sure you didn't misplace it somewhere?" Malachi nodded. "I always leave it right there." Rhonda overheard. "That old frame?" "I threw it out. The glass was scratched. It looked too worn." The answer struck like a slap. Malachi said nothing more. He turned and ran upstairs, closed his door, and buried his face into the pillow, trying not to cry, because he knew crying wouldn't help. Bryce didn't stop trying on more of Malachi's things. Hats, books, even a brand new pair of sneakers that Celeste had ordered just for him. Rhonda never stopped it. Terry smirked every time he saw Malachi quietly watching Bryce rummage through his stuff. "Kid," he said, "if you don't speak up, how will anyone know what's yours?" People only respect those who claim their ground. But Malachi was only 9. He hadn't yet learned how to push back. What he had learned was how to endure. And little by little, he lost the small things that once made up his world. One evening, as Malachi was reading in his room, Rhonda came in without knocking. She glanced around the room, then pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. "Your mom sent an email saying I need to check your homework. Give me your workbook." Malachi handed it over. Rhonda flipped through a few pages and frowned. "Your handwriting's terrible. I'll have Bryce tutor you. He's better at math anyway." He wanted to protest, but Rhonda's tone sharpened. "Or do you want your mom to know you made 5 spelling mistakes in one paragraph?" Malachi fell silent. Miss Cora stood at the doorway, not daring to enter. She knew Rhonda was tightening her grip on the household, and Malachi, the child with no one to protect him, was being bent like a green twig. In the following days, Malachi's breakfast became nothing more than a bowl of cold cereal. Meanwhile, Bryce got pancakes with syrup, almond milk, and even fresh strawberries. Rhonda started calling Malachi the little one, while referring to Bryce as the big brother. And to the new staff, that distinction somehow seemed normal. Bryce went to school in a separate car, sitting in front, blasting music. Malachi was pushed to the back, never getting a word in when teachers asked questions. Rumors spread at school that Bryce was Celeste's real son. Malachi overheard classmates whispering, "That kid's adopted. His mom's a CEO, too busy to raise a kid, so she hired people to do it." He didn't respond. He was afraid anything he said would make its way back to Rhonda. Once Malachi drew a picture for his mom. It showed him and Celeste standing together in the middle of a galaxy. But the next day he found the drawing torn to pieces, dumped in the trash bin near the laundry room. Scrawled on a remaining scrap was the name Bryce. Malachi picked up the pieces and stuffed them into his pocket, but he couldn't tape them back together. That night, Miss Cora quietly placed a new photo frame on his desk. She didn't say anything, but her eyes carried an apology and a silent promise. By the second week, Malachi had no toys left. His bookshelf was empty, his clothes had been swapped, his study schedule rearranged, and in Rhonda's eyes, he was no longer the boss's son, but a troublesome guest overstaying his welcome. But what was more terrifying than the loss itself was the way Rhonda twisted words to rewrite reality. You should be grateful, she said. At your age, a lot of black kids are sleeping in cars or shelters. You're lucky, Malachi. Living in a house like this, wearing clean clothes. Your mom's busy, so I have to teach you how to appreciate things. That night, Malachi didn't sleep. He sat on the floor of his room, the desk lamp casting a soft glow over his still face, his eyes fixed on the old photo, his mother holding him on the beach, now resting in a new frame. But Malachi knew the frame could change. His mother's embrace could not. Miss Cora stood outside the door, her hand lightly touching the wooden wall. She heard a soft sigh, as fragile as torn paper. And inside her something stirred, a quiet rage, aged but sharp as polished steel. She hadn't acted yet, not just yet, but she knew if a child loses the little things long enough, there comes a point when they forget who they are, and that to her was unforgivable. The second Sunday passed in an atmosphere of artificial calm. Light snow drifted outside the Holt family's villa window. The maple tree in the backyard had shed nearly all its leaves, its bare, brittle branches stretched out like old arms reaching into the cold sky. Malachi sat in his room trying to finish his math homework, just as his mother had reminded him to do in her most recent email. He worked hard, carefully writing each number with the sincere effort of a 9-year-old boy who only wanted to make his mother proud. But just as he reached the second page, the door burst open without a knock. Bryce walked in, chewing gum, holding a red game controller in one hand. "What are you sitting there for?" Bryce asked, his tone carrying a slight challenge. Malachi looked up. "I'm doing homework." Bryce raised an eyebrow, stepped closer, and placed the controller on the desk like he was claiming territory. "Put that away. Rhonda told me to show you a few examples. You're not as good at math as your mom thinks." Malachi hesitated. "I can do it." Bryce tilted his head, smirking. "You sure? Rhonda says your scores don't compare to mine. At my last school, I used to help raise other kids' grades. Today you have to call me sir." "Got it?" Malachi slid his chair back slightly. "I won't call you that." Bryce leaned in, voice dropping. "You're not the boss here. You're just a guest. I'm the one your mom trusts." Malachi felt the blood in his veins turn cold. He didn't understand why he had to surrender in the very house he had lived in since he was a baby. But Bryce's eyes lit up with smug satisfaction, as if he had read Malachi's mind. "Say sir. If not, Rhonda won't make you dinner." Malachi stood, backing toward the door, fists clenched. "I won't say it." Bryce let out a low laugh. "You'll learn, brat." And Bryce was right. That evening, there was only one plate of grilled salmon and a mixed salad on the table. Rhonda set the large dish in front of Bryce, selecting the thickest, juiciest portions for him, then turned to Malachi with a voice sweet to the point of deception. "The fish was a bit oily today, so I thought it'd be best if you didn't eat any. Your stomach is sensitive, remember?" Malachi bit his lip, saying nothing. Miss Cora looked out from the kitchen, but Rhonda quickly shot her a glare that forced her to turn away. Malachi was hungry, but he stayed silent. He understood one thing: resistance would only make things worse. The next morning on the way to school, Terry drove all 3 kids in the shiny black SUV Celeste usually used. He blasted loud rap music that pounded through the car windows, leaving no room for conversation. Bryce sat in the front seat, legs propped on the dashboard, shouting along with the chorus. Malachi was squished in the middle seat, pressed up against the door. When the car stopped at a red light, Terry glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "Hey, kid, if anyone asks, you're Bryce's cousin. Don't run your mouth. Your mom doesn't want people knowing you live differently." Malachi froze. "But I'm my mom's son," Terry chuckled. "That's what you think. But when's the last time she called just to talk to you? She always asks about work, about Rhonda. Whether you're her real kid, that's something only your mom knows." The words landed like a silent punch to what little pride he had left. Malachi turned away, eyes stinging. At school, things got worse faster than expected. Bryce made up a story that Celeste had only adopted Malachi after his birth mother abandoned him, unable to handle being a parent. One kid even asked Malachi in front of the others, "Is it true you used to live in an orphanage?" Malachi said nothing. His throat felt blocked by a cold stone. As he turned to leave, someone bumped his shoulder. "Charity boy," a voice whispered. "The good deed kid." He started eating lunch alone. No one invited him to play soccer during recess anymore. Bryce quickly befriended the wealthy kids at school, spinning arrogant tales about the villa with a private hot spring, and Uncle Terry used to be a chauffeur for a senator. Everything he said was half true, half fiction. But no one questioned him, and Malachi, the only one telling the truth, wasn't believed at all. Back home, things only got worse. Rhonda began enforcing a new house policy. Malachi had to clear the dinner table, mop the foyer, help Bryce clean his shoes, and organize books in the study. "You're a young man now. A man should know responsibility." She said this while letting Bryce play video games all day. Terry even placed a small nameplate outside Bryce's room. Bryce Clay, future CEO. Meanwhile, Malachi's room had bare walls and a study calendar. Miss Cora started quietly leaving small bits of food outside Malachi's room at night. A half apple, a small cookie. But Rhonda noticed. One night she called Miss Cora out to the backyard, standing beneath the dim yellow porch light. "You don't have to spoil him like that anymore. The boy needs to learn independence." Miss Cora looked her straight in the eyes. "Independence doesn't mean starvation and stripping someone of their dignity." Rhonda raised an eyebrow. "This isn't your house." Miss Cora nodded. "Number. But I've seen too many houses fall apart because people think they get to say that." Rhonda fell silent for a moment, then smirked. "Fine. Just remember who has the power to fire whom right now." Miss Cora didn't reply. But from that night on, she began keeping a small notebook, writing down everything she saw and heard. Dates, times, words, looks. In Malachi's room, the photo of him and his mother grew older with each day. He spent hours staring at it, silently asking her, "Do you know? Can you hear me?" One night as he lay in bed, a soft knock came at the door. "Bryce." He walked in and tossed a notebook onto the desk. "Rhonda says you need to write me an apology letter for refusing to call me sir in front of the driver." Malachi froze. "I'm not apologizing." Bryce grinned, stepped forward, and jabbed a finger into Malachi's forehead. "Then no breakfast tomorrow. Rhonda said so." Something inside Malachi cracked, not from hunger, but from the growing normalization of humiliation. He didn't say a word. Bryce left, slamming the door behind him. That night, Malachi wrote a letter, but not an apology. He wrote to his mother, a real letter, with messy handwriting and misplaced punctuation. But the first line was perfect. "Mom, I think someone is trying to take me away." He hid the letter inside his advanced math book, the one Bryce hadn't noticed yet. He hoped that one day she would find it. The next morning, he took the school bus. Rhonda said Terry was busy. Bryce had been driven ahead earlier. Malachi stood outside the gate, snow falling gently onto his hair. Miss Cora stood inside the house watching. She knew time was running out. Every passing day, the boy lost another piece of himself. And to her, that was a form of violence no one could see bleeding. The playroom used to be Malachi's favorite place in the entire house. There, he had solar system model kits, glow-in-the-dark star maps, and a planetary rug specially ordered from Italy by Celeste. In the far right corner was a wooden box where he kept his little treasures, the purple pencil casing his mom once used when signing her first contract, a sparkling rock he found on Nantucket Beach when he was 6, and an old train ticket with a handwritten note, "Malachi traveling with Mom, March." It was his private world, a world without noise, without the coldness of the marble hallways downstairs. But one Saturday morning, Malachi walked into the playroom and everything had changed. The planetary rug had been rolled up and shoved aside. On the floor, Bryce was sprawled out, playing video games on a handheld console connected to the big screen. The Lego set was no longer a solar system. It had been dismantled into a racetrack. The books had been rearranged into categories. Bryce's shelf and books Malachi never reads. Discard later. A paper was taped to the wall. New rules, Bryce in charge. Malachi froze at the doorway. He took a deep breath and stepped in. "What are you doing? This is our playroom." Bryce didn't look up. "Not anymore. Rhonda says I need space to learn how to manage things. You can go read in the library if you want." "Oh, wait. You don't have a neighborhood library pass, do you?" Malachi hesitated. "I've kept my stuff here. I have the right to play here." Bryce turned, squinted. "What rights do you think you have? Didn't you hear Rhonda call me boss? From now on, if you want to enter this room, you ask for permission. Malachi said nothing. His back was straight, but his hands trembled. He walked to the corner and picked up a broken Lego piece shaped like Saturn. Bryce watched him and sneered. Don't act all pitiful. I hate that the most. That afternoon, Rhonda called Malachi into the kitchen. There's a stain on the floor. Can you scrub it clean for me? She handed him a wet rag, the smell of disinfectant stinging his nose. Malachi didn't argue. He knelt down and began scrubbing. Terry passed by and shrugged. Well, finally someone knows how to keep a house clean. Rhonda chuckled. My son needs to learn how to work with his own hands. His mom's too busy. Who else is going to teach him? Miss Cora stood in the corner, drying spoons, silently. Her eyes watched Malachi scrubbing the floor, his knees red from the friction. She bit her lip and turned away. In the days that followed, Malachi was assigned a task for every day. Mop the floors on Monday morning, wash dishes Tuesday night, clean windows on Wednesday. Rhonda called it training a responsible heir. Bryce did nothing. He lounged in the living room armchair, snacking while watching Malachi work, occasionally giving mock orders. That spot's still dirty. Do it again. One time Malachi spilled water while doing the dishes. Rhonda snapped. Do you know this floor is made of imported Italian marble? A single water spot can ruin the polish. If you're not careful, I'll deduct it from your tuition. Malachi choked. But my mom pays for school. Rhonda narrowed her eyes. Yes, and your mom left everything to me. That means I get to decide what's deserved. The boy turned away. Miss Cora witnessed it. This time she didn't just stand still. She wrote a short line in her notebook. Day 14. Rhonda threatens financial control. Tone calm but explicit. But what broke her heart more was that night, when Malachi went into the kitchen looking for food, and she found him sitting under the counter, gnawing on half a piece of dry bread. He didn't turn on the light, didn't make a sound, like a ghost. She quietly turned away, opened the cupboard, and placed a bag of dried fruit and a milk carton on the table. When she looked back, Malachi was gone. The next morning, Rhonda noticed the floor hadn't been polished like usual. She yelled, Malachi, are you planning to let guests walk over a floor covered in shoe prints? Malachi came down the stairs, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Bryce sat on the stair railing, biting into an apple, chin raised. Maybe he needs the house rules tattooed on his forehead. Rhonda laughed. Good idea, sweetie. That was the final straw. That afternoon, when no one was paying attention, Malachi quietly returned to the playroom. He unrolled the planetary rug and laid it in the center of the floor. He rebuilt the Lego set into a solar system, though he didn't have all the pieces. He tore down the Bryce in charge sign, ripped it in half and tossed it in the small trash bin. He sat down in the middle of the room and exhaled. Even if it was just 10 minutes, it was the first time in days that Malachi felt like he still existed. But the peace didn't last. Bryce walked in, saw the scene and screamed, What the hell do you think you're doing? Malachi didn't answer. Bryce charged, yanked the Lego set from his hands, and hurled it to the ground. The plastic pieces shattered with a sound sharp as glass. Rhonda heard it and came running. At the sight of the mess, she said, Good grief, Malachi, have you lost your mind? This is a shared room. How dare you break things? Malachi choked. I just wanted to reclaim my space. Rhonda shook her head. There's no your space anymore. From now on, the playroom will be locked. You'll only enter when Bryce allows it. Malachi clenched his fists. This is my mom's house. Rhonda lowered her voice. Yes, your mom's house, but she's not here, and you're the one causing problems. So who do you think people will believe? Malachi turned away. He didn't cry, but back in his room, he lightly punched the wall, just hard enough to feel pain. Miss Cora knew. She saw the scrape on Malachi's hand, saw the boy's eyes growing dim like the sky before a storm. She wrote in her notebook, Day 15, playroom locked. Malachi denied access to personal space, signs of self-punishment appearing. That night, Miss Cora placed a knitted scarf she made in Malachi's room, along with a moon-shaped nightlight and a small note. No one can take your imagination away. He read it, folded the note into a star, and placed it on his desk. It was the last small flame he had left to hold on to. The third week began with the sound of a lock turning. Malachi came home from school, math notebook still in hand, and went to open his bedroom door, only to find the lock had been changed. A shiny new round lock now sat neatly atop the wooden doorknob. He stopped, confused. The room that had once been his last shred of privacy had suddenly become foreign. He knocked gently, but no one answered. He walked downstairs and found Rhonda sitting at the dining table, holding a cup of tea, legs crossed like a lady of the house. "Ma'am, why is my room locked?" Rhonda didn't look up. "I changed the lock. Your room's too messy, so from now on, you'll only be allowed in with an adult present. I don't want to clean up your scribbled papers anymore." Malachi froze. "But that's my room." Rhonda looked at him, eyes full of artificial sweetness. "No, that's a room your mother set aside for you, and she's not here, and you haven't done a good job taking care of it." Malachi wanted to argue, but Terry walked in from the yard, tossed his gloves on the table, and said loudly, "Rhonda's right. That room was a disaster. The kid needs to learn gratitude." Bryce came down the stairs, shaking his head with a grin. "Maybe he should sleep in the laundry room. At least there's running water." Malachi didn't respond. He turned away, heart pounding, and walked upstairs. He tried the door again, still locked. He sat on the hallway floor, back against the wall, head bowed low. From a distance, Miss Cora watched him. Her eyes held something both soft and steely. She said nothing, but she knew. Things had gone beyond the point of control. That night, Rhonda didn't let Malachi into his room. "You'll sleep on the sofa for now. I'll clean up your room tomorrow, and we'll see from there." But Malachi knew it wasn't temporary. He quietly curled up in a thin blanket, lying at the corner of the sofa beneath the dim lamp. Bryce passed by, tapping the back of the couch and whispering, "This is where kids who don't listen end up." Malachi didn't react. He was too tired to be angry. Miss Cora quietly brought him a soft pillow. She didn't say anything, just placed it down and left. She knew. Words wouldn't help now. The boy needed more than comfort. In the nights that followed, Malachi continued to sleep on the sofa. Every morning he folded the blanket and wiped the coffee table before Rhonda came into the kitchen. His room remained locked. The belongings inside were gradually cleared out. Some of them moved into Bryce's room. One day he saw the jacket his mother had given him being worn by Bryce as he played in the snow out back. Malachi ran out, shouting, "Give me back my jacket!" Rhonda turned coldly. "That was in your room, and your room is under my supervision now. If you make a fuss, I'll put everything away." Malachi swallowed his tears. He stepped back, fists clenched. That night, he pulled out a piece of paper and started to write. It was his second letter to his mother. The first time, he'd hidden it in his math book, but Rhonda had found it and tossed it out without a word. This time, he chose to hide it in the bottom of his school bag, the only thing he carried himself. His hand trembled as he wrote, "Mom, I don't know why everything has turned out like this. I have no place to sleep. I'm not allowed into my room. Miss Rhonda says I'm ungrateful, but I've tried. Do you believe me?" He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the bag. The next day, on his way to the car, he planned to give it to his teacher. But Terry stopped him. "Hand me the bag. I'm checking your books today." Malachi hesitated. "There's no need. I already packed everything." Terry smirked. "Hand it over." Malachi handed him the bag. Terry rummaged through it, found the letter, opened it, read, and scoffed. "Touching. You think this letter's really going to reach your mom?" He tore it in half and dropped the pieces on the car floor. Malachi stared, lips pressed tight. He turned his face away, eyes empty. He never wrote another letter. He understood. Nothing he said would ever reach his mother. At school, he remained shut out. He sat alone at lunch, worked alone during class. The other students had grown used to his quiet presence, as if he were just a nameless shadow. Bryce continued telling lies about his CEO mom, about his cousin Malachi being sent back to the countryside to live with their grandmother. No one questioned it. Malachi didn't deny it either. He was tired. Back home, he no longer resisted when Rhonda told him to mop the bathroom, when Terry ordered him to wash the car, when Bryce tossed his notebook to the ground and told him to pick it up. That night, as heavy snow fell, Malachi caught a cold. He lay curled up in the hallway, coughing, nose red. Rhonda passed by and said, "You should learn to take care of yourself. It's cold this time of year. No one's got time to babysit you." Miss Cora couldn't take it anymore. She quietly brought him warm water and cough syrup and set them beside him. Then she marched straight into Rhonda's room without knocking. Rhonda startled. "What do you think you're doing?" Miss Cora didn't bother with niceties. "Let me ask you directly. How long do you plan to keep this child locked out?" Rhonda sat upright. "I haven't locked anyone out. I'm just doing my job." Miss Cora glared. "Your job isn't locking a child out of his room and letting him sleep on the floor in weather like this." Rhonda shrugged. "You should remember who Celeste trusts to manage this house. You're just part-time help." Miss Cora replied slowly. "I'm the only one here who's not pretending." Rhonda smirked. "You could be replaced any time." Miss Cora nodded. "Maybe, but before that happens, I'll make sure of one thing. The truth won't be erased." She turned and left Rhonda sitting in a silence no longer so confident. The next morning, Malachi woke to find a thick blanket draped over him. Underneath was a small card. "You are not invisible." He looked around, but no one was there. Yet the first smile in weeks appeared on his face. Faint but real. That night in the kitchen, Miss Cora took out her phone. She looked at the contact marked Celeste Private. She didn't call, but her finger hovered over the keypad. She was waiting for the right moment. It wouldn't be long now, because if a child's bedroom could be locked, then a mother's heart could still be opened, if reached with the right words at the right time, by the right person. The night wind lashed against the windows like invisible hands. The large house lay still under the snow, its windows dark except for a faint kitchen light flickering like the last ember. Miss Cora sat alone at the dining table, her hand cupping a cold teacup, eyes fixed on nothing. She had witnessed many things in her life: war, loss, children who were never truly heard. But nothing had choked her like this. Malachi, the boy who once eagerly talked about Saturn, now slept on the floor with a thin blanket, coughing, and no one asked if he was okay. His room was locked, his letters to his mother torn apart, and the only thing left was a hollow stare that she couldn't bear any longer. Rhonda called it discipline. Terry called it character building. But she knew it was abuse, disguised by sweet voices, and she, if she still wanted to call herself a decent human being, couldn't stay silent anymore. She opened the small drawer beneath the spice rack and pulled out an old leather-bound notebook. Inside was a list of phone numbers. On the first page was a line of faded handwriting: Celeste, private line. She stared at the number, her chest heavy. Calling now meant overstepping. It meant tearing apart the silence she had held for 3 weeks. But not calling meant letting Malachi disappear from himself. She picked up the receiver of the old landline phone, the kind with the coiled cord and stiff plastic buttons. The dial tone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. She was about to hang up when a familiar voice answered. Low, quick, clearly busy. "Hello, Celeste speaking." She paused for a second, her fingers gripping the receiver. "Celeste, it's me. Cora." The line fell silent. Then Celeste's tone softened, still polite but clearly concerned. "Cora, is everything okay?" Miss Cora didn't answer immediately. She drew a deep breath. "I know you're busy, but I can't wait any longer." Celeste hesitated. "I just got back to the hotel. There's a shareholder meeting tomorrow. Is something wrong?" Cora answered firmly, "It's Malachi." There was a long pause, nearly 10 seconds. "What about him?" Cora's voice tightened. "You don't know?" "Number Rhonda says everything's fine. Malachi video calls me every week." "Have you looked at his eyes?" Celeste faltered. "He's been quiet, but you know him. He's always like that." "No, he's not," Cora interrupted. "Malachi isn't himself anymore. He's been stripped of everything. His room, his belongings, even his bed. Do you know where he's been sleeping the last 3 nights?" Celeste didn't speak. "He's been sleeping in the hallway, on the floor, outside a locked door. Rhonda took his things and gave them to Bryce. The letter he wrote to you, she tore it up." Celeste's voice dropped to a whisper. "That can't be true." "It is." Cora said, firm and unshaken. And it's happening right now. Celeste exhaled sharply through her nose. You're saying Rhonda locked Malachi's room? For what reason? She said it was messy, but that's not the point. The point is, your son is being treated like he doesn't belong. Terry has him washing the car. Rhonda makes him mop the floors. Bryce steals his toys and calls him the guest. You think that's education? Celeste sat upright in bed, still holding the phone. Are you absolutely sure? Do you think I'd lie? Cora's tone hardened. You think I, who cared for him since he was in preschool, would make something like this up in the middle of the night? Celeste didn't reply. Cora's voice softened. I know you're tired. I know work is heavy, but if you don't act now, you're going to lose him. Not his body, his spirit. He's slipping away. There was a long, heavy breath on the other end. Then Celeste said slowly, Are you with him? Always. Don't leave him. I'm flying home. Right away? Cora asked urgently. Right away. The call ended. Cora gently set the phone down, her hands trembling. She poured a glass of warm water, placed it on the table, then walked quietly to the hallway. Malachi was curled up in his blanket, his shoulders twitching slightly as he coughed. She sat beside him, didn't say a word, just laid her hand on his back and kept it there through the night. Outside, the snow was falling heavier. On the highway, a car veered off toward the airport, and in the heart of a mother, a storm was rising. Not loud, but certain. Inside the house, Rhonda sat watching TV. Bryce was already asleep. Terry snored steadily in the den. No one knew that at 3:17 a.m., the artificial balance they had built was beginning to fracture. Miss Cora opened her notebook and wrote a final line. Day 21 called. She's coming. It wasn't a threat. It was the most accurate weather report she'd ever written. The snow had started falling in the afternoon, tiny flakes like white salt quietly blanketing the eaves before melting slowly into the pavement. Oak Bluffs was always quiet, but that day it was eerily still, as if the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Inside the large house by the sea, footsteps echoed down the wooden hallway, sharp and cold like shoes pressing into ice. Rhonda walked down the stairs, a cream-colored faux fur shawl over her shoulders, a bucket of cold water in hand. Bryce followed behind, holding a cookie, giggling. Seriously, Mom, what did he do that bad to get sent outside? Rhonda didn't answer right away. She glanced out the window, watching as the snow started to form patches on the gray stone patio. She smiled. Some kids think that just because their mothers are rich, they can have anything they want. Sometimes they need a lesson that chills them to the bone. In the kitchen, Miss Cora heard everything. She set down the spoon she was drying, her hands trembling slightly. She stepped out of the kitchen, approached the hallway, and saw Malachi standing silently at the far end, still in his thin pajamas. Rhonda walked over and said, in a tone that left no room for discussion, Go out to the yard. I need to cleanse the house of negative energy. Malachi stood frozen. I'm cold. I didn't ask if you were cold. Rhonda tossed a thin jacket onto the floor, tilting her head with a grin. Go on. A bit of snow might clear your mind. Malachi lowered his head. He didn't ask why anymore. He simply stepped outside through the back door, barefoot, his breath turning to fog. The wind whipped across his face like a thin whip, biting but leaving no blood. The stone yard was white and empty. Malachi walked to the center and stood there, arms wrapped around his shoulders. He didn't know what he was waiting for. Only that this was the reward for his silence. Miss Cora approached Rhonda, her voice hoarse. What you're doing is illegal. This is child abuse. Rhonda laughed as if it were a joke. It's called parenting. You just don't understand modern child psychology. I understand it better than you think, Cora said, every word tight. And I will not let this continue. Rhonda turned. You gonna call the cops? With what? Testimony from a half-retired old maid? Cora clenched her fists, then walked away. Something inside her was cracking open. Out in the yard, Malachi was still standing. His cheeks had turned red from the cold. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a faded photograph, the one of his mother holding him at the beach when he was little. A gust of wind ripped it from his hand. He chased after it, catching it just before it hit the stone steps. then held it tightly against his chest like a charm. Just then, Rhonda stepped out, ice water bucket in hand, Bryce trailing behind. You know, Rhonda said loudly, people say black skin absorbs heat well. Maybe the snow will help balance that out. Bryce giggled. From the kitchen, Miss Cora shouted, "Stop!" But Rhonda had already tilted the bucket. The cold water splashed over Malachi, soaking him completely. The boy didn't scream. He didn't cry. He only trembled violently, lips pale, eyes staring straight at Rhonda like someone who had nothing left to fear, because he had nothing left to lose. And then, a strange sound echoed, the deep, steady roar of an engine. A familiar black SUV shot into the driveway, tires screeching across the snow before stopping at the steps. The car door opened. Celeste Holt stepped out. Everything froze. Rhonda stood stiff, still holding the empty bucket. Bryce stepped back. Miss Cora rushed from the kitchen, eyes wet. Malachi turned, eyes wide. Celeste looked straight at her son. He stood there, drenched, clutching the photograph, bare feet buried in snow. One silent second passed. Then she ran to him, dropped to her knees, and pulled him into her arms. Malachi shivered in her embrace, his face pressed into her shoulder as if trying to crawl back into his old world. Celeste wrapped her arms around him and looked up. Her eyes met Rhonda's, cold as a blade, direct as a sword. "What have you done to my son?" Rhonda stammered. "Ms. Holt, I was just—" He was misbehaving. Misbehaving? Enough to be doused with water in the snow? Celeste stood, Malachi still clinging to her coat. "I've been gone 3 weeks. You turned my home into a reformatory?" Terry stepped onto the porch, saw the scene, and quickly spoke. "Wait, Rhonda was just helping. The boy needed structure." Celeste cut him off, voice sharp as a razor. "The boy needed love, something neither of you ever understood." Bryce whispered to his mother, "Maybe we should go inside." Celeste stepped forward, pointing at the door. "All of you, out of my house, now!" Rhonda tried to regain her composure. "You can't do that. You gave me full management authority before you left. I gave you power to oversee the house, not the right to abuse my child." Celeste lifted Malachi into her arms and turned toward the house. Miss Cora opened the door for them. As she passed Rhonda, Celeste paused and whispered, "I'll make sure you never work near a child again." Then she walked into the house. Malachi buried his face in her neck, sobbing silently. Rhonda, Terry, and Bryce stood frozen. They said nothing, and for the first time, the people who had deluded themselves into thinking they belonged to this family realized they never did. The snow kept falling, but this time no one stood alone in it. The next morning, the gray sky hung heavily above snow-covered rooftops. There was no wind in Oak Bluffs, but the cold crept through every crack in every door, as if it wasn't coming from the weather, but from the very house now fracturing under the weight of a truth finally exposed. In the ground floor living room, Celeste sat in a leather chair, hands resting calmly on her lap. In front of her sat Rhonda, Terry, and Bryce, all facing her like students called to the front of the classroom for disciplinary review. The room was silent. The fireplace crackled quietly behind Celeste, but no one felt warm. Celeste didn't speak for the first 5 minutes. She just looked. Her eyes were still as frozen water, but the pressure behind them made it hard to breathe. Rhonda was the first to break the silence. "Ms. Holt, I understand that. Everything yesterday was shocking. But honestly," Celeste raised her hand, not to strike, not to threaten, just a short gesture, as if placing a period on the sentence. Rhonda stopped cold. Celeste pulled a small device from her coat pocket, an external hard drive. She placed it on the table and pressed a button. A recording played, Bryce's voice in the playroom. "He's not the boss here. My mom is now." Then Rhonda's voice. "If that little prince stays here long enough, he'll start thinking he owns the place." Then Terry. "He needs to know boundaries. Black kids shouldn't go imagining they're equals." Celeste switched off the device. The room stayed quiet. "I've heard enough," she said. "These recordings were pulled from the internal monitoring system, the one you all forgot to disable when you moved in." Rhonda tried to stay composed. "Those were things said in frustration. They don't reflect how we really feel." Celeste tilted her head. "Then how do you really feel? When you send a 10-year-old out into the snow? When you pour water over him? When you say his skin color is a reason for punishment? Terry jumped in. You're making too big a deal out of this. Celeste gave a small, cold smile. Too big a deal? You treated my son like he was leftover furniture. Bryce looked down. Rhonda began twisting her hands, but Celeste wasn't done. She turned toward the door. Miss Cora entered, holding a notebook. Cora, Celeste said, her tone almost soft. Go ahead. Cora nodded. Her voice was low but clear, steady. In the 3 weeks you were gone, Malachi was sent outside in cold weather 6 times by Miss Rhonda. He was denied dinner 3 times. Once Bryce threw a ball at his face. No one addressed it, and yes, I saw it with my own eyes. Rhonda poured ice water over that boy. Rhonda leapt up. That's a lie. She's old. Her memory isn't reliable. Celeste pointed at her. Sit down. Rhonda froze. Celeste continued. I trusted you. I let you live in my home, care for my son, believing you would provide stability. What you gave him was stolen control, stolen safety, and nearly stolen dignity. She stood, walking over to the table where a folder waited. This is a termination agreement. I don't need to sue. I don't need to make noise. I just need your signature. You have 2 hours to vacate my house. If you refuse, I will send the full recordings, Cora's notes, and security footage to my attorneys. Rhonda stared at the papers. Her eyes widened in disbelief. You'd destroy my reputation? Celeste gave a slow nod. Number you destroyed it 3 weeks ago. I'm just flipping the light on. Terry stepped forward, forcing a smile. Come on now, we're all adults. Can't we talk about this like grown people? Celeste didn't turn her head. Grown people don't use a child to exercise control. Bryce murmured. I'm sorry. Celeste looked at him. Her gaze softened. Bryce, I hope you learn this. Kindness doesn't come from status. It comes from how you choose to behave when no one is watching. Rhonda still hadn't signed. She hissed through clenched teeth. You think you're untouchable? Just a rich widow with no real power. Celeste exhaled. You're wrong. I'm a mother, and that's the only power I need. Within 2 hours, Rhonda, Terry, and Bryce packed their things and left Oak Bluffs under the cold stares of the former house staff and the silent gaze of Miss Cora. There were no goodbyes, no tears, only the wind pushing through the wooden halls like a farewell tune for 3 people leaving a stage they never truly owned. Celeste returned to the living room, where Malachi was reading a book. He looked up, eyes bright as if some invisible veil had been lifted. You're not going away again, right? Celeste smiled. Why would I go anywhere when you're here? The boy stood and ran to her, throwing his arms around her waist. In that embrace there was no more snow, only warmth. A storm had come, but it hadn't screamed or shattered. It had simply swept away everything that no longer deserved to stay. Malachi woke up at 6:03 a.m., almost a full hour earlier than usual. The dim light from his window spilled across the gray carpet, outlining a cold edge along the wooden floor. There were no slipper sounds from Rhonda in the hallway, no sizzling pans from Terry, no hairdryer humming from Bryce's room. The house was still, quiet enough that he could hear the rhythm of his own breathing. He stepped out of bed barefoot, brushing close to the wall as he crept down the hall. As if still unsure that Rhonda was truly gone, the playroom door was ajar. No Bryce, no locked board game boxes, just scraps of paper. Malachi remembered all the times he'd been forced to pick up those pieces with his bare hands. He reached the kitchen and froze. Celeste was there. No luxurious robe, no lipstick, no phone in hand. Just a mother pouring milk into a cereal bowl. You're making breakfast? Malachi asked, voice scratchy from sleep. Celeste looked up and smiled. We need to start over, with the small things. He sat down, brushing his fingers across the edge of the table. They're really gone? Celeste nodded. Not coming back. He stayed quiet for 10 seconds, then said softly, I still see them, in my head. Celeste didn't rush to correct him. She reached out and placed her hand gently on his. They might stay in your head for a while, but you have the power to push them out, bit by bit. He nodded slightly, took a spoonful of cereal, then paused. They said I didn't belong here. Celeste looked at her son. You belong wherever you are loved. The back door opened. Miss Cora stepped in, holding an envelope. Someone left this at the gate, No return name. Celeste opened it. Inside was a printout, 3 internal emails from the Oak Bluffs Education Fund. In one, someone named M. Price, a member of the town board, had thanked Bryce for suggesting an adjustment to minority admission standards to maintain balance within the community. The final line of the email read, "No need to CC Rhonda. She knows how to handle it." Celeste tightened her grip on the paper. They weren't just wrong. They knew they were wrong and tried to cover it up. Cora sighed. "I think this has been festering for a long time. Rhonda wasn't the root. She was just one of many who knew how to thrive inside a rotting system." Celeste stood. "I need the list of every town meeting from the last 3 months. Who attended? Who missed? Who led?" Cora looked at her, then gave a quiet nod. "I've kept the records. I always do." In the small basement library, Celeste sat among dozens of file folders. On the desk were 3 photographs: Rhonda, Bryce, and M. Price. Beside them was a slip of paper. "Justice is not loud. It is patient." A quote she had once written in an old notebook during her years as a strategic advisor for a nonprofit organization. The phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID. Amara Bishop, her former legal advisor, who had worked with her through several hearings on workers' rights. She answered. "Amara, I heard you're about to light a fuse in Oak Bluffs." Celeste smiled. "I'm not lighting a fuse. I'm just opening a window so others can finally hear what's been muffled." "When?" "Friday. I want an open hearing. No media, no press. Just the people who live here, listening to the words they once chose to ignore." Amara paused for a few seconds. "I'll be there, and I'm bringing a copy of the Equity First statute." Celeste nodded. She knew this fight was no longer a family matter. This was a community matter, a town that had chosen comfort over truth. That evening, Celeste sat down to write invitations. One by one, teachers, the librarian, the clinic doctor, the local pastor. No emails, only handwritten letters. She wanted each recipient to feel that this wasn't an event, but an invitation to face something. When Malachi entered the room, she looked up. "Would you like to come with me to the library tomorrow?" "What for?" "To borrow The People Could Fly." He smiled. "I like that one." "Me too. It reminds me that people only stay grounded if they forget they can fly." He nodded. "Will you help me remember?" Celeste pulled him close and wrapped him in her arms. "From now on, I will never let you forget." And the next morning, the two of them, a black widow and a boy once buried beneath prejudice, stepped out of their home in Oak Bluffs, carrying a folder of records, a list of witnesses, and a quiet belief that the storm had passed. But the aftershocks would be what finally reshaped the town. Friday, 8 a.m. The Oak Bluffs Community Hall had been cleared of all decorations, flower arrangements, colorful bulletin boards. Only rows of plain wooden chairs remained, white walls and sunlight pouring through tall windows. No speakers, no microphones, no cameras. At the long table in the front sat 3 name cards: Miss Cora Bell, Amara Bishop, and Community Testimony. In the center, empty. Celeste had asked for no moderator's chair, no judge's seat, no host, only a storyteller and a listener. The air was thick like a morning before a storm, except this time, the storm had passed, and people were here to count the damage. The first to step forward was Miss Cora. She brought no notes and didn't look at anyone. She simply stood, hands folded across her chest, and began. "In 2007, I was called to fill in the night shift at Oak Bluffs High School after the regular custodian had to quit for health reasons. I cleaned floors, bathrooms, and the kitchen. I first saw Rhonda when she was still an administrative assistant. She never looked at me, not once, but she always spoke loudly, like she wanted me to hear that we need higher standards for the people serving our students." She paused. "One day I overheard her tell the principal that the school needed staff who wouldn't frighten the white students. I knew that was about me." The room fell silent. Cora looked toward the back, where Celeste and Malachi sat. "I said nothing. I was scared to lose my job. But I remember Malachi, a tiny little thing, always waving at me in the hallway. I remember because it was the only time anyone in that school looked at me like a person." She stopped, gave a slight nod, and stepped down. Next was a middle-aged woman in a library cardigan. My name is Janice. I used to be the school librarian. Bryce once asked me to flag Malachi's borrowing record because he showed advanced reading patterns inconsistent with his grade level and possibly linked to emotional instability. Several people in the room raised their heads. I refused. The next week, I was reassigned to the Old Branch Library. No air conditioning. I don't have proof, but I know I was pushed out because I didn't go along. She bowed her head and stepped down. An older man in a baseball cap walked up next. I'm Mr. Foster. I drove the school bus for nearly 20 years. I once heard Terry say Malachi might be emotionally disturbed because the boy didn't talk much. I told the school I saw him being isolated, but no one listened. He removed his cap. I should have gone to his mother, but I didn't have the courage. I'm sorry. He said the last part looking straight at Celeste. Then came a young red-haired woman, a cafeteria worker. Bryce once told me not to serve Malachi any special meals because he needed to learn not to expect exceptions. The boy had a milk allergy. I gave him a dairy-free plate. The next week, I was taken off the shift schedule. She paused, then added, I didn't lose my job, but I lost my belief in the phrase, for the students. Today, I got some of that back. The last voluntary speaker was a man in a white shirt. My name is Mr. Fields. I teach social studies. I once submitted an essay Malachi wrote to the administration because it showed an incredibly sharp mind, especially on the topic of power and marginalized voices. I was told, please keep essays within standard format so other students don't feel uncomfortable. He looked down at his shoes. I stayed silent, and I was wrong. The room fell quiet again. Celeste rose. She said nothing. She simply walked to the center of the room, turned to face the crowd, and held out her hand toward her son. Malachi. The boy stood. He walked slowly. Every eye was on him, not with suspicion, but with expectancy. No one forced him to speak. He could have turned away, but he didn't. He stepped forward. He stood before a microphone. No notes, no bowing, no shaking. He looked straight ahead. They said I wasn't normal. They said I couldn't run in the hallway, couldn't bring my own books to class, couldn't eat alone, couldn't be quiet. I didn't argue, I just didn't speak. He looked down at his hands. I believed them, that I was wrong, that I was invisible, that the best thing to do was not upset anyone. He looked up. His voice stayed calm. But I wasn't invisible. People just chose not to see. A long breath. A strange stillness rippled across the room. Not confusion, but realization. An elderly teacher began to cry. A man unclenched his fist. And then, as if guided by something ancient and wordless, the entire room stood. No applause, no cheer, just rising, because sitting no longer made sense. Celeste stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her son. But this time, Malachi didn't curl into her. He stood tall, hand in hers, not hiding, not shrinking. As the two of them left the hall, the afternoon sun streamed through the long window, casting a warm beam across the sign above the door. Community doesn't begin with policy, it begins with listening. That evening, Celeste and Malachi walked through the park. For the first time, he didn't trail behind her. He walked beside her, a mother, a son, two shadows stretching across the autumn path. Not lonely silhouettes, but two distinct shapes of a story finally told. This time, right. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with a gavel or a headline. Sometimes it comes in the quiet voice of a child finally being heard, in the long pause before a community decides to stand, and in the courage of a mother who simply refuses to let her son be erased. If this story made you feel something, hope, heartbreak, or maybe just the urge to hug someone tighter tonight, then it did its job. We believe stories like these matter. And if you do too, don't let this one disappear. Leave a comment. Tell us what part struck you the most. Hit subscribe, because every week we share hidden stories just like this one. And if you believe no child should feel invisible, hit that like button to show you see them now. This isn't just a story, it's a reminder. Some people aren't invisible. We just haven't looked yet.